for both parties. It's almost a symbiosis that has allowed partner institutions to better fulfill their mission. Unfortunately, tonight we have an important soccer game at the same time. I just wish that we have a large audience. We could not make a provision on this date. Anyway, thank you very much, Professor Sutter. We are eager to hear you develop the topic that you proposed to us as part of this course, because this is a class, but at the same time is open to all the white auditors in general. Thank you very much.
Hey, so I should start now?
No, let me introduce you. Thank you. Also, on behalf of Observare, Observatory of Foreign Relations of Autonomous University of Lisbon, I want to begin by welcoming and thanking our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Robert Sutter, whom I will introduce in a moment. Allow me to salute my distinguished colleague, Professor Carlos Gaspar, who coordinates this course and conference cycle with me, and of course, welcome our students and all the participants in this conference. Notice, I recall you that this conference is being recorded and that the link to the recording will then be made available on the Observare and IDN websites. This conference is associated with the Advanced Studies course on Asia Pacific that the Autonomous University of Lisbon and Observare organized in partnership with the National Defense Institute, and is part of a vast cycle of conferences that started last April 15 and will last until the end of June, always on Thursdays. Today, besides this open class with Professor Robert Sutter, we have already had a lecture in the morning by Professor Toshimi Nohara from Japan, and in the afternoon, a talk on India by the researcher Constantino Xavier. After Professor Sutter's conference, we'll have a Q&A period, inviting all participants to then address your own questions and comments. In the meantime, I will post in the Zoom chat the link to Professor Robert Sutter's latest book, and also the link to a recent interview by Professor Robert Sutter to the China Leadership Monitor. But without waiting any longer, I'm now introducing Professor Robert Sutter, whom I have the privilege to know personally for more than 20 years, and with whom I have the honor of sharing a very good friendship, always learning a lot from you, Bob. Professor Robert Sutter is one of the world's leading experts on East Asia and US-China relations. He is a professor of practice of international affairs at the Elliott School of George Washington University since 2011. He has also served as director of the school's main undergraduate program involving over 2,000 students from 2013 to 2019. His earlier full-time position was Professor of Asian Studies at Georgetown University for 10 years, a PhD graduate in History and East Asian Languages from Harvard University. Professor Sutter has published 23 books, 4 with multiple editions, over 300 articles, and several hundred government reports dealing with contemporary East Asian and Pacific countries and their relations with the United States. His most recent book is Chinese Foreign Relations, Power and Policy of an Emerging Global Force, 5th edition by Rowan and Littlefield. Professor Sutter's government career for more than 30 years saw service as senior specialist and director of the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Division of the Congressional Research Service, the National Intelligence Officer for East Asia and the Pacific at the US government's National Intelligence Council, the China Division Director at the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and professional staff member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Professor Robert Sutter, once again, many thanks for being available to share your many knowledge and perspectives with us. We look forward to your lecture on America's negative turn against China. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the very generous introduction. And it's wonderful to see you again, Louis. Thank you so much. And it's nice to be affiliated with this program. And I look forward to the questions and comments that people might have at the end of the presentation. This is something, what I propose to do today is to explain the key role of American domestic politics and the US Congress in the driving of this change in America's negative turn toward China. Folks, this I think has been the key driver. And if you want to understand the direction of the United States, please pay attention to this. This is what I find a lot of I'm a China expert. I have a lot of China expert friends. They don't understand Congress. They don't understand domestic politics in the United States all that well. And I worked for Congress for over 23 years. So I do understand Congress. And I found it remarkable in this instance. So I want to emphasize that. And of course, in a country that has a parliament, you don't understand our Congress so well. Congress is very separate from the executive branch. They are truly independent of the executive branch. So it's very different than a parliamentary system that you have in many democratic countries. Okay, so we're going to try to understand that. And then we're going to understand how these domestic politics and international circumstances, mainly Chinese behavior, is pushing the United States to a tougher negative approach toward China. But that the allies of the United States aren't as intense in their calculations about China. They're not so negative about China. And they have business communities that don't want to be negative about China. And so this is a factor that may moderate the American policy and public opinion in the United States. While negative toward China, Democrats tend to be a bit more moderate on China. And allies are very important. So putting these together, you will get a sense of the forces that are both pushing for the tough policy and the forces that are open to more moderation in the existing policy today. And then I want to explain the high stakes. You really can't understand American behavior on China over the last 4 years unless you understand the stakes seen by the policymakers. And these stakes are very high. And so when an American official comes to Europe and says, we need you to do X because of China, there's a lot of force behind that on the part of many American decision makers. They feel very strongly about this for very basic reasons, and I'll try to explain those. And then I'll try to discuss some of the implications for allies and partners, including Portugal and other NATO countries. My main finding is that the Biden administration's approach to China is measured and deliberative. It's firm, but it's not emotional. It's not. It doesn't have a sense of urgency to it that was present in the Trump administration's approach. But it is negative for sure, and it's heavily influenced by these domestic negatives in the United States and the Congress in particular, favoring a robust, tough policy toward China. But on the other hand, are the allies and the partners who want a more moderate policy. And the Democratic Party has a number of people in it that also want a somewhat more moderate policy. So this is the situation. So what I'm giving here today is basically a situation report on what's driving this policy toward China, and will it continue, and what's at stake. That's what we're going to try to do today. Now, to do this, I have to give some information about how this policy emerged and the power of the policy. How powerful is it? How lasting is this negative turn toward China? And so I'll do that by describing the major developments in the change in policy, the beginning in 2018. So we're going to deal with 3 key years, 2018, 19, and 2020. And we're going to hit some of the highlights of that period to show the movement toward a tougher policy, but it's sometimes erratic. Sometimes it slows down and it moderates. But what we're in now, and we've been in a period for about a year of a very tough policy toward China, articulated by American leaders. So trying to understand that, what drove it and what continues to drive this negative approach, I think is important to understand. And if you look at the drivers, you have to say, well, can those drivers change? And my sense is you'll find probably not. But I don't want to preclude that. So I'm going to talk about that. Then I'm going to spend time on Mr. Biden's approach, and President Biden and his team, how they're going about dealing with China. I'm going to talk then about what's at stake for the United States at present in dealing with China effectively, and then some implications for allies and partners. Okay, so let's go through. I have a document that I provided to the organizers, and it's talking points. If you have reference to that, great. If you don't in the future, you can get reference to you. I think it summarizes what I'm saying today. It can be useful for you if you want to review what was said today, if it's not clear in the oral presentation. Okay, so let's take a look at the negative turn. The origins of this negative turn, from the American point of view, came because the Chinese government changed. They changed their approach. They were moderate. And in the first decade of the 21st century, they were very moderate. They were following what they called a peaceful rise approach, which was designed to reassure everybody, especially the United States, that China would rise peacefully. And in practice, they did this. They were moderate in a whole range of ways on most issues. This is the first decade. This is 10 years ago, earlier than that. And what we've seen in the United States is a change. The Americans that chart this say it happened after the economic crisis of 2008, 2009. China felt it was more powerful, which it was. And they saw the US in decline, they saw Europe in decline, they saw Japan in decline, and they saw Russia in decline. And this was their time to be more assertive. And it took me a while to agree with this idea because I was so wrapped up in what the Chinese had been doing in the first decade, which was to be reassuring and to not do this kind of thing. But step by step, piece by piece, piece of evidence by piece of evidence, you come to the conclusion, yes, they've changed their approach. And Xi Jinping is the epitome of this, the leader of China. He's the epitome of this change. He demonstrates it, he articulates it. At first he called it the China dream, then he called it we're in the new era. He put aside Deng Xiaoping's ideas about being cautious in foreign affairs, and he became very assertive across the board in all sorts of issue areas. Not to the point of military attack. He isn't Putin. He's not doing that. He's doing it very incrementally. And you have to watch carefully, keep track of these sorts of things. And what you find is patterns in all these different areas where they're being very expansionist at others' expense. And so this is what the United States has faced. And it's recognized it. In the past, this wasn't recognized by U.S. policy. Before Trump, this was not recognized by U.S. policy. U.S. policy was designed to get along with China and to manage these kinds of differences, but not seeing them as a grave danger. That's changed. And so it changes, I think, from the American perspective because of Chinese behavior. Now, I need to give you the Chinese view on this. You remember Barack Obama, and he had a rebalance policy in Asia. And he implemented this rebalance policy. And I was very involved with this. I mean, very involved with watching this, working with administration people on this. And I didn't see Barack Obama as confronting China with this sort of thing. It was designed for many reasons. Anyway, the Chinese interpreted this as containment. They said the U.S. is out to get us, and Obama is going to do this to us. Now, in retrospect, if you look at Obama's record and you see him, that's a joke. Obama being, like Stalin or something, he's not like that. He wasn't like that. But that's the way they interpreted it. And they rationalized their assertiveness on that basis. So I have to give you the Chinese point of view here. That's all. I'm going to be fair to the Chinese. And then I'm going to come back and give you what I think what the Americans think about this. And that is, no, the Chinese said, we have more power. We want these things. We wanted them for a long time. Now we can get them because we have the power to do it and they can't stop us. It's pretty simple in some ways. Okay, so the point is that this is the concern in the United States, but it doesn't come out right away. You remember the first year of Mr. Trump's rule? He was getting along with Asian countries, all of them, and he got along with China very well. Xi Jinping had a visit for him in November in Beijing that had never been happened before to an American leader. It was just all stops were pulled to impress and make this guy have a nice trip. And Mr. Trump hardly ever said thank you to a host, but he was effusive in his thanks to the Chinese leader for this wonderful trip he had in November of 2017. Thus it was that it came as a surprise in December, 1 month later of 2017, the national security strategy of the administration comes forward. And that strategy is very negative on China. I'm an old timer. I hadn't seen anything like this in 50 years of work on this issue. This is deep Cold War rhetoric. And the executive branch never did this since Nixon, never did this. Congress would do it from occasion, but never the executive branch. Now the executive branch comes out and says, this is the main national security threat of the United States. China, and then Russia, but China first. So this is quite a, why? Well, all the issues that you're familiar with, Taiwan, South China Sea, trade issues, all of those are in there, but there are two new ones that are very important. And the first one is domestic influence operations, the Chinese penetration of the United States. That was deemed as very important in this strategy. It was deemed very important by executive branch agencies like the FBI and the Justice Department. And this was a new thing. The U.S. hadn't even thought about this very much. But now we saw all around us, we found evidence that the Chinese were influencing the situation. Universities, media, all sorts of things. And that got a lot of people upset in the Congress. And this was a bipartisan feeling. Did you ever hear of a person named Elizabeth Warren? She was a very prominent Democrat. She is a very prominent Democratic senator, ran for office, and she was very concerned about this, among many others. Bipartisan worry about this in the Congress. But the more important one was this: high technology. China had now reached a point where it could compete and dominate, if possibly, the high technology industries that the United States had relied on for its economic leadership. That's been the key to American economic leadership, is a dominance, or at least a very strong leadership in these high technology industries of the future. Made in China 2025 is designed to counter that. That China is seeking a leadership position in this area. And they're applying a lot of the state-backed economic practices that they have to do this sort of thing. The logic goes like this. If China succeeds, this will mean that the United States will be the second economy in the world, not the first. And China will dominate those industries. If China dominates those industries, it will dominate the military of the future. The military of the future is integrated with those industries like that. If China dominates the militaries of the future, along with the economy of the future, American policymakers in Congress and elsewhere say China will dominate. If you want to understand the driver of this negative turn, take a look at that. To me, that's the key argument that's used. And it's hard to counter it. Oh, the Chinese aren't seeking dominance. Oh, the Americans are way ahead. All these, you hear all these things. It's not really true. China doesn't want to be dominated by the United States. The United States dominates these industries. China wants to make sure that doesn't happen. How do they do that? How do they deter the United States? On the military side, hardware, I was a national intelligence officer. I understand how to do this. Hardware, you can look at the situation. Well, we've got this system, they've got that system, we're going to be okay. We can deter them. In high tech, you can't do that. The stuff hasn't even been invented yet. So this race, this competition is very intense. It's a big driver, and it's bipartisan in the Congress. Okay, so I explained that, and I think that's important to understand. And that driver, you'll see that it still manifests now. You see that will drive the Congress to take a very strong, bipartisan in the Congress, a very strong position in turning against China and in supporting this national security strategy. Congress will say, yes, this is exactly what we should be doing. What the national security strategy says. That's not what Mr. Trump will do, but that's what they say. Okay, but this takes a while to sink into the American politic. The American people don't understand this. The media doesn't understand this. But Washington is in the midst of this in 2018. But in that midst, it's confusing. Mr. Trump is all over the lot. He moves back and forth. He loves Xi Jinping. He hates China. You know, he goes back and forth and this sort of thing. And then the media doesn't understand this. Mainstream media, they're talking about Trump being protectionist. That's what they talk about. And then the public opinion has no idea this is going on. So I would make this kind of talk throughout 2018 and 19. I went to about 20 different locations in different places in the United States and made this talk to explain to people what was happening. They understood, and they didn't understand. And these were well-informed people. So they do understand now because it's become mainstream, the policy. But implementing this policy in the beginning was very erratic. The Trump administration was divided on sanctions, for example. And so it was drifting for several months until the Congress came in and passed a National Defense Authorization Act for 2019, passed in August of 2018. And that law made a whole of government U.S. countermeasures to China's challenges a matter of law. And it's very comprehensive, had all sorts of different aspects to it, but clearly reflected this anxiety about technology in particular, as well as defense issues and so forth. And following that, we had various sharp attacks by the administration on these issues, and the tariffs were initiated at this time. The trade war began at this time. And that was part of this kind of pushback against the Chinese. So the things were moving in this direction in 2018 until they reached a talk. They had talks. The senior leader, Trump and Xi Jinping had a talk in December 2018, and they agreed to have trade talks, talk about the tariffs, and how to end the tariffs. And so they started those talks. Those talks will last for over a year. In that year, 2019, reflecting a lot of different things, but reflecting the ambiguity in America about this issue, you find a number of elements of ambiguity. Donald Trump goes back and forth, critical of China, not critical of China. He's not uniform. He doesn't follow the strategy. He doesn't do it. even though the State Department and Defense Department are following the strategy for sure. And then you find that the administration leaders, because of the trade talks, they're much less vocal about China. They don't want to jeopardize the trade talks, I guess, but they were much less vocal. The Congress was still very negative toward China, but there was no big vehicle, legislative vehicle in 2019 that went through this. Public opinion still was not concerned about China. They didn't like the Chinese government. 50% plus didn't like the Chinese government, but they certainly had no sense of urgency on this. And the media was just starting to understand this. And then the Democratic candidates, if you look at what Biden said about China in 2019, what did he say? First of all, the China issue, the foreign policy didn't come up much in the Democratic primaries. And but when it did come up, China would be there. And what would the candidates say? They all were very not that worried about China. It was not a high priority. And Biden said several times, he said, we're way ahead of China. We don't have to worry about this. That's the way he characterized this issue. That was 2019. Maybe you've heard of Jake Sullivan. He's now the National Security Advisor. And he said in mid-2019, we shouldn't be tough on China. The American people don't want to be tough on China, and we shouldn't do it. So you'll see that there are lots of elements here that suggest maybe the U.S. won't stick to this policy that they have today. But more on this in just a minute. So this is a relatively recent thing. But other elements that were taking place at this time that hardened the American approach includes a whole series of efforts on the part of others to deal with these issues. First, the media starts to understand and starts to agree with the tough approach to China. Mainstream media does this more and more. There are a whole series of detailed studies by think tanks and investigative journalism and so forth that report how the Chinese penetrate and have influence throughout the world, how they use leverage. The Chinese get leverage in dealing with a country, and they use it. They're more prone to do this than any other significant power in the world. They do it all the time. And this shows how it works. And they're pretty effective at it. And it's usually done. It's a hidden, unconventional disguise type of approach. And then you have elements in Trump's base that become very anti-China. These are conservatives, I guess. But these are people, number one, Americans that don't like foreigners. Well, they don't like China. Number two, Americans who feel they lost their jobs because of China. Lots of them, and they don't like China. Number three, business people that lost their businesses because of China, and there are lots of them, and they don't like China. And then we have evangelical Christians. And evangelical Christians don't like China in a very strong way. And they're all big supporters of Trump. So this is a solidifying of this. And then finally, to mention here is that Trump just stops being concerned about the relationship with China. And so we had over 100 dialogues with China in the past. They all atrophy. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the stakeholders in the US government that used to worry about their positive stake with China and didn't want to be negative toward China, they don't have, that's not an issue for them anymore. They don't have anything that's going on. And so if you have a hard time policy toward China, they're not going to stand up and object. It's going to affect our program in China, so on and so forth. And so it reduces the incentive to moderate your policy toward China inside government agencies. And finally, Mr. Trump isn't known, his people aren't known for dealing well with allies and partners in many respects. And so, but nonetheless, they were starting to build coalitions of allies and partners to protect intelligence, share intelligence and protect it, to work on economic and trade issues with them in ways that would counter China and to reinforce the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy. So that's 2019. And it spills over into 2020. But by March of 2020, America is hit really hard with the pandemic. And in that context, Mr. Trump becomes very critical of China. The Chinese, in a way, catalyzed this by suggesting that publicly, officials did this, foreign ministry officials did this, that the Americans planted the COVID in Wuhan, China. That's a Cold War type of trick. And so Trump just reacted very badly to that, became very negative toward China. The whole administration became very blaming China for the virus and taking a very tough stance toward China. And they found this resonated with the American voters. And it did. American voters very quickly said, wow, China's the source of this thing. And so opinion about China in the United States, public opinion, had, as I said, had been ambivalent before, becomes very negative. And in this context, Republicans say, we've got a real issue here. So they started hammering away at the Democrats for being soft on China. And they're still doing this. This is a big issue for them. And so Biden and the Democrats had to shift, and they did right away. And they shifted to a much tougher policy, criticizing Trump for being actually soft on China. And so the Democrats are battling each other to see which one is tougher on China going into the election of 2020. And so the situation becomes very negative then. And so the administration people who have been held in check because Trump was vacillating against China, he no longer vacillated. He was very tough. And so the various Pompeo and other agencies were taking all sorts of actions against the Chinese. This eventually gets into the closures of consulates. It does all sorts of punitive measures were enacted against China. And China retaliated, and relationships just went way down. In the Congress, there are almost 400 bills in the Congress against China at this time. 400. It's an amazing number of bills. It encompasses every member of the Congress, for sure, in this way. And so the result is a very negative trend going into the election on the China issue. And the significant thing, the most significant thing here is, of course, that public opinion is now very negative against China, and the media is very negative against China. So that's a reality that politically one has to deal with. And so the Chinese respond harshly, critical, but they recognize they don't want this whole thing to explode. And so they hold their fire. They don't give any ground, and they continue their incremental expansion, but they don't confront the United States. Very careful not to do that. Okay, so that's where we end with this historical review. Now let's look at the Biden administration. They come into office, and it's fairly their strategy toward China has not been made clear yet. They're working on it. That's what they're doing. But they've done a number of things that give you a pretty clear idea of the kinds of things they're going to do. First of all, they say China is a very important issue, but foreign policy is not a leading area from them. Domestic issues override. Pandemic, number one, the economic recovery, that's very important. And then we have these social issues and divisions inside the United States, the issues of Black Lives Matter, the issues of the extremism on the right. These kinds of issues have to be dealt with first. Once you get the other things in line, then you can focus more on China policy. Their approach on strategy is to be resolute, but measured and deliberative in their interactions involving China issues and foreign policy issues in general. And they have to deliberate in two ways. Number one, they have to work with Congress and make sure their policy works with Congress. And on the other hand, they have to work with allies and partners and make sure their policy works with them, because they put a lot of emphasis on this. They mean it. We need allies and partners to make this work. It's not going to work if America does it alone. Trump tried to do it alone, and they feel that was a big mistake. You have to work with allies and partners. So this is going to take time. We're seeing it in action. We see the G7 meeting. We've seen the Indo-Pacific, the Quad meeting that took place with Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. These kinds of efforts are designed to get some common ground on how to deal with China. And so this is a feature of the administration. The Biden people, the way they speak, do not have this sense of urgency that I talked about. The sense of urgency that China will dominate if we're not careful. That led to a lot of urgency, and it still does in Congress. But Biden's people don't speak that way. It's not. They're much more deliberative, and so I just point that out because perhaps they're not committed to this as much as the people in Congress are. And so as they carry out these deliberations to work with allies and partners, they basically don't seek closer ties with China. They're waiting. We want to talk to the allies and partners first, and we want to talk with our domestic constituencies in the United States, China, and then we'll be able to talk to you. But we need to know what they feel and adjust our policies accordingly, and then we'll be able to talk to you. That's the basic line of approach. Okay, and for now, they're keeping all the tough Trump policies. Punitive tariffs, the export restrictions, import restrictions, all are there. They continue. They're not easing that up. And in a way, Biden is a bit tougher on some of these issues. And we'll talk about that in a while. We have the human rights issue and Xinjiang, genocide, the charge of genocide, this kind of thing. And so this is Biden, as a Democrat, feels very strongly about this. So what we can do in looking at the future is to say, okay, what are the big forces that are driving the U.S. to be tough, to keep the negative approach to China? And what are the forces of ambivalence and moderation that could lead to an easing of the U.S. negative push against China? Okay, first, the supports of continued negative approach. China, number one, under Xi Jinping, they're just not giving ground. They're not given an inch to accommodate the United States. They're willing to talk, but it's your problem. You created in America, you got to fix it. And so the Americans say, it's not a problem. We got a problem with you, not a problem. And so so China is not budging at all. The Republicans view the China issue as a key issue for them. They have the 2022 elections in mind already. And if they can hit the Democrats as being tough on China and win a bunch of congressional seats because the candidate is too soft on China, they're going to do it. It's a big issue for them, and they want to use it. And Trump is not going to undercut them. Trump has been consistent about China for over a year now. Remarkable. He's this way. And of course, he's a big force in the Republican Party. The bipartisan commitment to this policy in Congress is very strong. It's going to be a very big bill carried out by Mr. Schumer, the majority leader of the Senate. We'll have all sorts of China provisions in it going into this year. It's under process now, and the plan is, and there are lots of other bills too, but the salient ones will be incorporated into this big anti-China bill that will be coming out later this year. Probably similar to the bill we saw in 2018 that had many provisions, only probably bigger and more important because this is led by the majority leader. The leader of the Senate is in charge of this. Mainstream media and overall public opinion remain very negative toward China. That hasn't changed significantly, even though some of the Democrat public opinion are more moderate toward China. Now, trends of ambivalence and moderation include a number of things. The rhetoric of Obama, of Biden and his key advisors is measured. It's not the over-the-top type of ideological condemnation of Chinese communism that you saw in the last year or two of the Trump government. It's not made as an ideological struggle, but it is a systemic struggle for sure. The key leaders in charge, as I've already hinted at, the key leaders in charge of China policy in the Biden administration are the same people that managed China in the Obama administration. And Obama was much more accommodating to China. Obama valued the relationship with China to the point that he tried to finesse the various differences that the US had with China. That's what those people did at that time. And so, but they're not doing it now. They're doing the opposite, as I indicated earlier. But this could be a source of moderation later. Third, the issues of the pandemic, the economy, and climate change all need China's cooperation. You're going to have to sit down and talk to China. And when you do that, you're going to probably have to compromise or manage some of your differences. You can't be extreme demands negative in that situation. Working with allies and partners. If you're going to get allies and partners to cooperate with you, you're going to have to make compromises. You're going to have to figure out, okay, well, you know, these folks generally don't like the extreme Trump policies. And so you're going to have to figure out a way to accommodate them going forward, because America needs them. The administration judges that they definitely need them. And then one thing to watch here, this isn't necessarily a moderate trend or a negative trend. This is sort of a process trend. Biden does China. He knows foreign policy. He was the chair of the committee. He was on the Foreign Relations Committee for 30 years, 40 years. He knows foreign policy, and he was vice president for Obama. And he makes his own decisions. And he's going to get advice. He'll get he has excellent advisors. And the close advisors are people who have been with him for many years. So watch for a pattern where Biden makes decisions, and people like Sullivan and Blinken are in the inner circle talking to him. And people like former Senator Dodd, who just went to Taiwan for Biden. People like that. Those are the people he really trusts. Dodd was very instrumental in Biden selecting Harris for the vice presidency. These are people he trusts. And so those folks, so when you look at, and what Biden tends to do, as you can see already, he compromises. He does compromise. He makes deals with people on various ways. He wants their support. Okay, what do you want? What do I want? And what can I give up that will make you come on board with me? And he does that all the time. And so what does this mean with allies and partners? It means you're going to have to be more moderate. The US is going to have to be more moderate. That's important to keep in mind. On the other hand, keep this in mind. He needs Congress. And Congress wants a tough policy. And he'll negotiate with Congress. And he'll seek the middle ground there. But the middle ground with Congress, I think, is going to be much different than the middle ground with allies and partners. Allies and partners aren't going to want the tougher policies, where Congress will want the tougher policies, if you see what I mean. So this is something that you should watch. Okay, I have a few minutes to talk about what's at stake and allies. And I hope I can do that now. Okay, just what's at stake. I'm a person,
Please, Bob, open your sound.
Yeah, I know for some reason, I don't know why. The host muted me according to the sign, so I'm not. Yeah. So the host unmuted me now. That's good. Yeah. And so, what I'm an analyst in dealing with these issues over time, and what I've found is I'm usually pretty moderate on dealing with issues. I'm very incremental in how I come to decisions. I'm an evidence-based analyst. As an intelligence officer, that's really important to be an evidence-based analyst. You can go off on theories, but boy, you better have your facts and evidence in mind you will be accepted. And so that's my mode of operation. It's been that way for a long time, 50 years. And so what I've done in this book in particular is that I've just changed that book. It's totally rewritten, and it's all about Chinese foreign policy, and the era of reassurance of China is over, and the evidence of what the Chinese are doing and challenging the United States in various areas is enormous. And I say, okay, the Chinese are doing this. Why are they doing this? Do they want to topple the United States? Do they want to confront? Not necessarily. China wants what China wants. They want to be more powerful. They want to have greater wealth and power. And they have the capacity to do it. And they do it their way. And their way is very opposed by the US way in a whole range of areas that are very important. The whole free trade economic system. The Chinese don't do the free trade economic system. They work with it, they exploit it, but they certainly don't do that. They try to manipulate it so they don't have to do it. And they're very good at this. This is where leverage comes in. They're excellent at this. And so what I see, therefore, is a whole series of challenges that China poses to the United States that are very serious. Number one, their military advances in Asia focused on what? Focused on America. Countering America and killing them, if necessary, if they get in the way of what? Of Chinese territorial acquisitions. So this is a number one issue. Number two, ever closer collaboration with Putin's Russia against U.S. interests. Did a big study on this with 100 other specialists. I led this study. It's really a very good enterprise. And this opened my eyes to what the Chinese were doing with Putin. Amazing. And so this is collaborating for a whole host of reasons. Many of them don't involve the United States directly, but what do they ultimately do? They all ultimately undermine and weaken America. That's in there, every one of these areas that they cooperate with them. Number three, the continued economic policies that I just talked about, which are very detrimental to any country that has a strong stake in the existing economic system that we have. Number four, building and exploiting economic dependencies via the Belt and Road Initiative and other means. This is a very carefully crafted approach designed to build leverage. You get involved, building infrastructure, you have enormous leverage on these countries. Coercing neighbors to defer to China's ever-increasing demands, that gets a lot of attention. You've seen that a lot. Fostering corrupt and authoritarian governments against the West. They do that all the time. Employing widespread influence operations abroad using clandestine means. Yep, doing that all sorts of places. And they disregard international law and accepted diplomatic practices. So what I conclude, what's at stake? Well, the existing order is at stake. Fundamentally, it's at stake. Is China going to create a new order that everybody's going to have to abide by? I don't think so. No, it's going to weaken this one, ever more weaken it as they expand their wealth and power. And they will do it, and that expansion comes at other countries' expenses. This is not a free thing. It comes at their expense. And if they don't recognize this, they should. And that's the point of the book. And so the United States has recognized this. They're very concerned about this. And they're taking actions to deal with this. That's what's at stake, it seems to me. Okay, now let's get into the implications for Portugal and NATO. Just a few minutes on this. Well, Donald Trump isn't the president anymore. Well, for allies and partners, I think a lot of them breathe a sigh of relief. I do a lot of work talking to countries in Asia Pacific. And I did a big report that involved consultations with most East Asian Pacific countries about Trump and Biden. And I haven't done much of this in Europe. I just follow the media in Europe. But I think the issues are pretty similar in a rough sense. And so Trump disparaged alliances in Europe, and he disparaged alliances in Asia. Insulting, constantly insulting the people. And so this was a real negative. And but privately, many of the governments felt the tougher policy toward China was overdue. You certainly get that in Asia. India, Japan, definitely feel that way. Vietnam, definitely that way. Yes, we need that. But boy, Trump really did it the wrong way. But the point is you did it. And they want that to continue in some way, that kind of approach. And then the other aspect that was very important in Asia, and I think in Europe, is the cost of decoupling. If you have a decoupling and moving in that direction, this is very detrimental to business. And businesses are very webbed in with China, and they don't want to do that. And so even if the government of this country wants to do it, the business community works against it, if they can. So to varying degrees, allies and partners want a more multi-layered approach. They want a firmer policy toward China. They don't object to that. That's needed in many respects, but they want it done in a way that doesn't fundamentally jeopardize their particular interests. And the biggest one here, I think, is business, but there are other issues as well that you could deal with. And so Mr. Biden will have this issue, as I pointed out. He'll have to negotiate with the various allies and partners and come up with a united approach on particular issues. And the administration people say that, well, they're going to have one coalition on one issue, one on another. It'll be different. Not every country will line up on these kinds of issues. We're not going to have a block necessarily. And they don't anticipate that, given the multifaceted nature of the challenges that the United States faces in dealing with China. But the allies and partners at the same time welcome Biden because he gives much higher priority and much more respectful treatment to allies and partners in crafting U.S. policy. This is manifest. I think it's true. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe it's all optics, but I think it's a lot more than optics. I think they actually are listening and taking it into account. And then they also welcome, and I think the Europeans welcome this as well as those in Asia Pacific, they welcome the U.S. engagement and promise leadership in regional and global institutions dealing with health, climate change, and other problems important to these allies and partners. So it isn't just about strategy, it's about these broader issues. There are differences among allies and partners about some issues of Biden that they're concerned about. Promoting democracy. These Western countries in democratic systems sometimes don't want to promote democracy. Think Japan. They don't want to do this in Asia much. They're hesitant to do this sort of thing. And yet Biden is very committed to this. The Democratic Party is very committed to this. And so when Blinken says he thinks what's happening in Xinjiang is genocide, that's emblematic of how the Democratic Party leadership tends to think about these issues. And then some allies and partners are wary of Biden on economic issues because he wants to make the economy to the benefit of the American working person. That's his, and this is a protectionist in a way. And they see this as protectionist, and they don't necessarily buy that. So these are just small understandings of issues that will develop over time. This is not a concrete manifestation at all. I think we'll have something better to work with when we get a clear strategy, when they've worked it out within the administration of what their approach is on these sensitive issues. But thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions or comments you may have on this broad range of things. If I can help with, I'd be happy to answer your questions. So please proceed to the next part of our session together.
Thank you, Bob, for this wonderful presentation. Now we are opening the Q&A period. Maybe I could give the word to Professor Carlos Gaspar, and then please make your questions or comments using the Zoom chat or by viva voce. Carlos.
Thank you very much, Professor Sutter, for a wonderful presentation. I was very impressed by the stress on the evolution of Congress and the consensus between the President and the Congress on this issue, which began, I think, in a moment of extreme polarization during the Trump period. But is still alive. I think, as you said, thanks to China mainly, more than anything else. You mentioned, and I think I would like to go back to that, the issue of working with allies, and this is clearly a change from the previous administration. President Biden wants to work with allies, wants to share the burden of containing China with allies in Asia, allies in Europe. But there are 2 or 3 problems which you mentioned that are in the way, especially if you look at Europe. Actually, in his speech to the Congress, President Biden referred to foreign leaders telling him, yes, America is back, but for how long? And it struck me as something very unusual for a president of the United States to say. I mean, there is obvious merit in being very frank, but I thought it was a bit too much frank. And I hope they were not listening in Beijing. But the other point, and what was very recently said in the European Council by a major European leader, is that Biden is an exception. And yes, for the next 4 years, things could go in the right direction, but the main trend, the irreversible trend, is for America not to come back, but to retreat, as happened during the Obama and the Trump years. So there is a problem for the European allies to engage with President Biden if they think that this is just a temporary, a brief interval. And the longer trend is for the United States to retreat and to turn its back, namely on Europe. This is my first point. The second point is, which I feel is strong in European opinion, is that especially in Germany, in the German leadership, you have this position very close to the Chinese position of being against the return of the competition between blocs, against bipolarization. Some Germans even are in favor of a European equidistance between the United States, its main ally, and China or Russia. That's another important issue, especially in Germany. And then there is a third issue, which is, I think, of a strategic nature, and this is mainly the French position, as I understand it now, that you cannot go against both Russia and China at the same time, and that one of the main efforts of the United States and its allies should be to separate Russia from China. By the way, this is also a very strong position in the case of India, and at least during the Abe period, also a very strong position in Japan. So you have here some different problems. Is this change? Is the Biden change for good? Why should we engage in a new bipolarization and be dragged into this conflict between the United States and China? And finally, can we deal with China and Russia as they converge, or should we strive to separate them in some kind of way? Thank you.
Let me just answer each question in turn.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Rich. This is going to take a while.
Of course.
Thank you very much. It's excellent. I can just give you some indications. As you say, I've been around for a while. I've seen the United States in decline at other times. The Vietnam War, after the Vietnam War, pretty bad situation. We got beaten bad in Vietnam. We lost a lot of people and we were beaten bad. And things were the economy was terrible, pretty bad. And it didn't, and did you probably remember, maybe, well, I'm not, you really have to, back in the 70s, the West widely thought in 1975 to 1981 that the Soviet Union was going to be the leading power of the world. Maybe you remember that.
We are in Portugal. We remember the revolution and the Cubans in Angola, sir.
Yeah, and what the U.S. didn't do in that one. And so, you talk about expansionism, and U.S. looking in decline. That was a good period to remember. And so I take it with a grain of salt. I've been through a lot. America is a very resilient country, and people like me, and I think the government is full of people like me. They want to fix it. They want to fix it. And they'll try to find a way to fix it. And so how long will the Americans do this? Public opinion says the public wants to work with allies and partners. That's public opinion. So you can say, oh, the Republican Party doesn't want this. That's not really true. It's very mixed. And so I think how long? I think, of working with allies and partners, allies matter. And as a practical matter, how the hell is America going to deal with China by itself? They've got to have allies and partners. Sorry, you don't have the option of not working with allies and partners, if you see what I mean, if you're going to be effective in dealing with China. It doesn't mean that you have to have a NATO against China or anything like that. It just means you've got to have them next to you. You got to have them posturing in the same way that you're doing to underline this emphasis, this importance. That's what you need at this point. And I think that's, and America, so realistically, is America going to, how long will it do it? Well, if you think America is going to be dominated if you don't do it, and you can't do it yourself necessarily, well, you darn well better have your allies there with you, right? I mean, I just think, so just as a very practical matter, yeah, okay, you don't care about foreign policy, but you don't want to be dominated by China. So what are you going to do? I think you're just going to be out there pitching with these folks, making sure that they understand this. And of course, the related to this, will these allies see China the way I depicted it? Will they see it that way? They haven't really looked at it. If they looked at it more carefully, I'm convinced the evidence is just overwhelming. They would see it for what it is. And what it is it's not that China's, evil in that sense. They're not evil. They want it their way. And then you have to examine, well, ally country, is this going to work for you? What is this going to mean for you? And I think if you look at it carefully, it means you're going to be controlled to one degree or another by China. If that's what you want, well, then so be it. But I don't think these allies have looked at this carefully. But I have found, and this may be a overgeneralization, I don't know for sure, the intelligence communities of most Western countries are very concerned about China. What do they know that these other people don't know? I think they understand China a lot better than the media and politicians in various countries. And businesses, unfortunately, they're conflicted. They may be patriotic, but they have these interests of their company. And so as far as the country is concerned, that may become second in their calculation. I can't speak for them. So for all these kinds of reasons, I think that's what makes me think about that. On American staying power, I just say this. When this dire view of China came forward in the Congress in that bill in 2018, and it led to a whole series of other bills, China loomed enormously powerful in these ideas. They look very powerful country. Maybe they overdid it. They kind of look very powerful. Technology and espionage and cyber theft and all sorts of things. And no one in the Congress stood up and said, we have to stop this hardline policy. We need to make a deal with China. No one said that. That's the whole Congress. And so what does that tell you? It says, no, what are they saying? We need to resist. That's what they're saying. We need to push back. We need to resist. That's uniform. That could change, but watch it. So is America here to stay? Yeah, I think for the time being it is. The indications are very powerful in that regard. As far as we've got this problem, it's a big problem for us, and we don't know exactly how to handle it. We know we need help in handling it. And we're not going to change our mind that we need to handle it. I think that's what I'm getting at. So I don't want to, I'm going on, let's see, and then on Russia, China, I spent 2.5 years leading this group, 40 American experts on China, 40 American experts on Russia, 50 foreign specialists of Russia or China, including 10 from China and 10 from Russia, and a few from Europe and several from East Asia. The National Bureau of Asian Research, you can look it up. And we studied this issue really well. And we said, this is a long-term problem. And you're not, if you tried, China, why were China and Russia working together against the United States? Because the United States was weak. If you try from a position of weakness to split them, they're going to pocket whatever concessions you make to them, and then they're going to work more together to make you even weaker. That was our judgment. And so trying to split them at this time is not going to work very well. Trying to work on the asymmetries between the two, the asymmetries of power. Russia is 1/10 the size of China's economy. Russia is puny compared to China in a whole range of ways. So you can play on that. You can work on that, but you can't, the idea of just going in and, we're going to split you. No, it's totally different. They've worked together, integrated themselves together ever more closely. And Putin's been making a lot of compromises to keep the Chinese on good terms with him. And so this is, I think this is foolish to do this. I think, and so I say to the French, I think we have to do this together. We have to work. We have to do it both at the same time. And you say you can't do that. Well, I think you can, but I think it's difficult. It's back to needing allies and partners, I guess, in that respect. But if you try to split, strategies, we examined lots of strategies to look at this, and those that tried to do this in the beginning stage, when both Europe and both the allies and the United States were weak, this was going to make them take advantage of it and stay ever closer together so they can get more. That was the basic. So you have to be careful, at least, how you deal with this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sutter. We have now 3 questions in the Zoom chat. Nelson, please go ahead, make your question, even without camera.
Okay, are you listening to me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sorry for not seeing me. I still have camera issues, so I'm sorry. Okay, Professor Sutter, this is my question. One of the big themes, events that might happen and will eventually happen this century is the demographic change in the US. And my question is, do you know if, or is it known if the Chinese political class, foreign policy, decision makers, academia have some sort of opinion about America changing its demographic composition? And my other question is also regarding this demographic change, that if the US-China relationship deteriorates to a very severe level, do you think that China might use America's diversity and racial tensions against itself, against America itself?
Well, I think the Chinese are well informed about the demographic. The Chinese authorities are well informed about the demographic trends in the United States. I think they understand this. I think what I read is that the fact that many societies are facing an aging population issue, and the United States has not had to face this so much, at least, is because of the demographic trends. Lots of people here from different countries who are producing offspring more than the previous American residents here, and so so we don't have this aging population problem so much. And Chinese specialists are well aware of their own demographic problem. They do have a very prominent problem, and it's going to last for several decades on the aging population. So yes, they're aware of that. On the diversity side, the Chinese media that I read is constantly focused on Chinese people in the United States. Chinese people throughout the world. Naturally, they would do that, it seems to me. And there's been an upsurge in anti-Asian violence in the United States, which is a very bad thing from the American point of view. And the Chinese do take advantage of that. They publicize that all the time, constantly talking about this, and try to use it. And obviously, it does discredit America in the minds of Chinese citizens and throughout the world. You know, I have to say the American society as a whole has it coming. I mean, this is right in that sense. These are reprehensible things that are going on. I personally think these things wouldn't happen if we didn't have a leader that made it look like it might be acceptable to do this sort of thing. We didn't have that leader. And he was accepting of all sorts of things, and I think that's very negative. But we don't have that leader anymore, and we have a government that's designed to protect and to foster a close integration in the country. And if you look at his cabinet, you look at his senior appointments. I mean, my goodness, I've never seen anything so diverse, but that's America. That's certainly the America where I live. And I think that is America in many respects. But yes, the Chinese authorities will highlight these negatives in the United States. The negatives, they're highlighting it, but the negatives are real. These things happen. It didn't happen, you know, in past years very much, but it's happening now. And I hope it stops happening. I hope people get arrested and don't do this sort of thing. And I think that's what will happen. But that hasn't. It takes time. It takes time. And I think the administration certainly will be leading the country in a direction of inclusiveness and tolerance. I think that's very much needed. I guess I'll stop here.
Okay, we have two more questions from her. Do you want to do it directly? Should I read your question, her? Well, the question is, Professor Sutter, what were the policies the Obama administration instituted that China interpreted as a containment strategy? It seemed odd given how often Obama was criticized for being too dovish. The other question from AC is, Professor Sutter mentioned that some people in the USA had reasons not to like China. Some were racist, xenophobic, others lost their jobs, others suffered losses in their business. And then he mentioned evangelical Christians. Why do they specifically don't like China or the Chinese?
Okay. Yeah, on the first question, I agree with the questioner. I find it baffling too, that the Chinese saw this as a containment policy. But if you look at the broad outlines of the pivot to Asia, the rebalance policy, it was designed to strengthen U.S. relations with most countries of the Asia-Pacific region. And it was designed to keep and strengthen relations with China too. And it had an economic dimension, it had a security dimension, all sorts of dimensions. It was partly designed to, to counter the challenges the administration felt from China. They felt that the Chinese were taking advantage of the situation. They were treating the United States in different ways. They were challenging them over Tibet, Taiwan arms sales, economic issues, and other such things. And they were, excuse me, just a minute. They were supporting North Korea in this period of leadership succession when North Korea was being very aggressive toward the South Koreans. And they were starting to contest in the East and South China Sea. And so how to deal with that? And so what the administration did was come up with this strategy, which would allow the United States to make more money in Asia, because they'd be more engaged with these countries, have better diplomatic relations and other relations with these countries. And from a security point of view, to cooperate with them, share intelligence, this type of thing, for all of them, and most of them anyway, to the point that what the Obama government would do was, with almost all the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, was to make them stronger. It would make them stronger. The U.S. interaction with them would be more active and would make them stronger. And did these governments like the United States? Often they didn't. No. But would it make them stronger? Yes. Was that in American interest? Yes. What does America want in Asia? America wants a favorable balance of power in Asia. How do you do that? Well, you make sure that no hostile power to the United States can dominate Asia. Well, if all these independent-minded countries in Asia are stronger, that does the job, doesn't it? And so the Chinese saw that as disadvantaging them. Because what do they want? They want an Asia where China is the leader and the countries defer to China. And they're not independent and assertive. No, they defer to China. And if they don't defer, then the Chinese put pressure on them and then they defer. And so the Chinese didn't like that. And they saw the strategic aspects of it as building relations with India, building relations with Australia, building relationships with Japan, and with many other countries as well. And they saw this as making the U.S. more robust in the region. The actual increase in troop levels was very small, but the attention was active. And they didn't like that. And then they found the U.S. was competing with China in various international forums, ASEAN forums, the East Asian Summit, for example, other such things. And so the Americans were speaking out on issues that the Chinese didn't want them to speaking out on. So, but the Chinese took this a way step higher, and they said, well, you're trying to contain us. And Mr. Obama is working on this, and I listened to the National Security Advisor in private sessions tell this to everybody. And it was there were 20 of us in the room. And this happened several times in the Obama government. They were very open. They listened to academics. And so the Trump people didn't do much of that. But anyway, they said, look, we have to reassure the countries in Asia that we're not going to upset the relationship with China. We want a good relationship with them, and they want a relationship with us. But if we upset the relationship with China, they're going to have to distance themselves from us. And the rebalance isn't going to work. So part of the rebalance had to be in close engagement with China and to avoid a break in the relationship, a upset of the relationship. And they worked very hard to avoid that. But nonetheless, the Chinese saw it as containment, and therefore they used that and publicized that, made the people of China feel this way. And they're very good at doing that, getting everybody in China to feel this way. And so they did, and so it was negative in that sense. The other question was on, let's see, help me on the second question, if you would, Professor Tomei.
Yes,
I tried to write it down, but I was busy with the other one.
There are many.
Yeah.
Why do people in the US specifically don't like China? And the Chinese
evangelicals. The question is about
the evangelicals losing their jobs and so on.
Right. The evangelicals have two issues, I think, with China in particular: religious freedom and abortion. And China, was using forced abortion, coerced abortion in the past. Got a lot of publicity about that, and then China is suppressing religious freedom in China. And China's a funny place. I'm not sure how many of you know this sort of thing. But the missionaries are all over. Foreign missionaries are all over China. Have been for decades. And they're usually English teachers, or they're working in some sort of component in guests of scholars or something like that. But they're actually missionaries. They're there to save souls, and the evangelicals really believe in saving souls. They take this quite seriously, and so they know what's going on in the underground churches. They know what's going on in the networks that they have. Are feed into this sort of thing, and they know how the Chinese authorities try to crack down on this and repress it. So they don't like China for that reason, Chinese government for that reason as well.
Okay, I have my own question. I have many questions, but I have one to close our session, not to spend much of your time. I see many differences between Trump's and Biden's strategies of dealing with China. Biden administration places much more value, as you have said, on America's allies and partners, international institutions and multilateralism, democracy and human rights, climate crisis, and so on. However, in the midst of so many changes, in contrast with Trump in these first 3.5 months of Biden administration, I find it strange that so far Biden, former vice president of Obama, has said nothing on rehabilitating the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, nor the TTIP with the European Union. So what does this mean? Doesn't Biden want to move forward with the new free trade agreements with his regional allies that could be China's counterweight mechanisms in the Asia Pacific and Euro-Atlantic regions? It's just that in the meantime, under Trump's America First policy, the US became more isolated, and China managed to sign the RCEP agreement with other 14 Asia Pacific countries, and also the comprehensive agreement on investment with the EU 27 countries. that is on the front of democracies against China and other autocracies, doesn't the US need to renew and deepen economic and trade ties with its democratic allies and partners? Or, after all, is the Biden administration still relatively protectionist in economic terms, including vis-a-vis its allies and partners? That's my provocative question, Bob. Please open your sound again. Something happened.
I should have raised that in the discussion. I apologize for that. This politically is impossible. Look at the campaign. First, who killed the TPP? Donald Trump didn't kill it. Bernie Sanders did. This got killed in the campaign in 2016. Hillary Clinton went into the campaign ambivalent about the TPP and had to abandon it during the campaign. And so, and that's been the politics of this ever since. And so when the issue came up in the campaign in 2019 and 2020, the Democrats stayed away from that. They just, no TPP. And so maybe something will change over the next couple of years, but I think for today, to do that, I think the Republicans would be all over them on this issue, because the Republicans are now protectionist. You know, they used to be free traders, but they're not anymore. And so this is just red meat for the Republicans, and so you're not going to do it. You're not going to give it to them. So I think this is just, they're going to have to find some other way to work with the Europeans and the Japanese and Australians and others to meet those cooperative economic interactions. But you say, is Biden protectionist? Well, yes, in a way, I think he is on this so-called bring industries home, the production chains, bring them into the United States, benefit the worker of America. This kind of thing is, industrial policy. It's and protectionism to some degree. But multilateral trade agreements, it's and if you did raise it, you need a trade promotion authority. Trade promotion authority elapses, I think, in this summer, and so it lasts only for a few years. And it's always so difficult to get Congress to pass this, to allow. But the issue here is that Congress, by the Constitution, is in charge of trade. But they mess it up so badly that they routinely pass laws that allow the executive branch to do it, to come up with the deal, and then they just give it an up and down vote, rather than if they brought it to them as a free piece of legislation, it would never get passed. So that's why the trade promotion policy authority is used. But that was done in the previous administration. I think it was even before. I'm not sure. It may have been before Trump. But it's over now. It will end this year, and they have to have new legislation. And given all the other things that the Biden people need Congress for, to go to the Congress for something like this, very controversial, and you'd be going into it another election year coming up. This is just a bad idea to do this. And so raising this issue is just, it's a non-starter, I think, right now. Do people in the Biden administration see the utility of a TPP in dealing with China? Oh, yes, I'm sure they do. But politically, I think it's very hard to do. And I think I understand that. And so I think that's, and then, but the European Investment Treaty that you mentioned, it looked bad, but is it really going to pass now? I mean, outsiders like me looking at this say, well, the Chinese
probably not. But at the same time, China could join CPTPP at least.
No, they're not going to join you. The Japanese aren't going to let them in. Xi
Jinping said that.
I know Xi Jinping. He expressed an interest. This this is a way of nudging it, of just underlying the point that they're a lot more flexible than the United States, and they're in favor of globalization. This is the image that, when he was at Davos, he said, I'm in favor of globalization, and the Americans are all American first and unilateral and so on and so forth. And of course, he's not in favor of globalization. He's in favor of Chinese globalization, which is a very different thing, as I tried to illustrate today. And you can read my book about this, and it just explains it, how this is what they mean by globalization. And I think once you examine this kind of thing, then you can see that, well, anyway, I believe the Japanese are going to let him in the TPP at this point. This is a non-starter. So I'm not sure what the loss is, the image of being open, cooperative with allies and partners, sensitive to their issues. I think we just need to find another way to do it. Bilateral trade understandings, common efforts on various things. But this kind of multilateral trade agreement like TPP is politically, I think, too hard to do. And in the United States, and you're asking him to lose the Senate and the House in the next election, you see, and I don't think he's going to do that, if you see what I mean. Mistake.
Thank you so much, Professor Robert Sutter, for sharing with us your many knowledge and insights, sharing your time. And please ask the audience to give a huge applause to our distinguished guest using the button of reactions in the Zoom bar below. Please, it's the Zoom applause. We are all very grateful to you, Bob Sutter. You give us a lot of things to think about, and we are grateful for that.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a great pleasure to be with you all, and particularly to work with once again with Professor Tomei. It's always a pleasure. Thanks again.
Thanks. It was our honor. Give my best regards to Valerie and your grandchildren. We keep in touch. I hope to see you all.
Excuse me?
No, I'm just saying to the audience, I hope to see you all next week. We're going to have 2 more conferences. Until there, keep safe. And Bob, thank you again. Best regards to my American family. Bye.
Professor, boa tarde.
Boa tarde.
Boa tarde a todos.
Professor.
Fiquem bem.
Obrigado.
Boa tarde, obrigada.
Obrigado.